Good morning and welcome to the CDA Vendor Portal demonstration. My name is Yvette Drake and I will be your presenter today. Our agenda is brief. We are going to demonstrate the website and then open for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and at the end of the session, we will allow you to ask your question. The Vendor Portal is a website that can be used to track the department's processing of invoices, view purchase order releases, and submit forms used for approval of staff rates, expenditures, and travel related to CDA contracts. The Vendor Portal can be found at flychicago.com under the Business with CDA section. Passwords were emailed this morning. If you did not receive your password or have any questions about how to access the portal, please send email to tiffany.ford@unisonpfaudit.com. Send your question, your name, email address, and your purchase order or contract numbers. Okay, with that, we'll move on to our demonstration. To access the vendor portal, go to the flychicago.com website. Then go to Business with CDA, Vendors, and click on the link that says CDA Vendor Portal. You will be required to have valid credentials to log into the site. Your username is your email address. And a temporary password was mailed along with your email. Was emailed to you along with your the email that we sent this morning. When you log in for the first time, you will be prompted to change your password. After successfully logging into the system, you'll see a menu at the top of the screen. I will walk through each of these functions on the menu, starting with invoices. When you click on the Invoices menu option, a screen will display showing the prime contractor's invoice information. You'll see the prime contractor's name, their invoice number, the invoice date, the date the invoice was received by the CDA, the invoice amount, the audited amount, if the invoice has been audited, the purchase order that the invoice will be charged against, the date that the user approved the invoice, a yes or no to indicate if the audit has been completed, the receipt number, and the date the invoice was sent to the comptroller's office. Please note the statement at the bottom of the screen which says, allow up to 10 days from the date that the invoice was sent to the comptroller to receive payment. Using the search function, you can search for invoices by invoice number, by purchase order number, or by prime vendor name. You can also use the asterisk to conduct a wildcard search. Okay, the next thing that I will demonstrate is releases. Using the releases option, you can view releases that have been created by the CDA for the procurement of goods or services. And again, these will just be releases relating to the prime contractor's accounts or contracts. You can review all releases for a particular contract. What's displayed is the PO number and the release number, the release date. The description is actually the contract description, and the release amount. By clicking on the paperclip, you can download a copy of the release or open the release for viewing on your screen. Next, we have the CDA online forms. Here you can see a list of previously saved forms, as well as submit new expenditure approval forms, status rate forms, and travel authorization forms. I'm going to skip this menu option until I complete the others, and then I'll come back to this. The vendor contacts menu option will allow you to see the contact names for each contract. So for this contract, the contact names for the prime vendor are listed, and their subcontractors will be listed. This information is created when the prime registers a user on the system, and I will show you how that's done. The CDA contacts menu option allows you to see CDA contacts by contract. Displayed for this contract are just the finance contacts, but the project manager or other CDA representatives can list themselves as contacts for the contract. My profile allows you to maintain your profile. After you log in for the first time, you'll want to come to My Profile and ensure that all of the contact information is correct. On the bottom half of the screen, you'll see a number of check boxes that you can use to indicate what you should be contacted about, so that if CDA is sending out a targeted communications, they can tell by what you checked here what communications you're interested in receiving. Add user. This is where the prime contractor can add users to the system. The prime contractor may choose to add other users within their own organization, and they would add the subcontractors using this screen. Before a status rate form can be submitted, the subcontractor would need to be added to the system using this function. This is done by selecting the company name and just typing the first and last name of the user and their email address. When this user is added to the system, you'll receive an acknowledgement, as well as the user will receive an email informing them that they've been added to the system, and they will receive an email very similar to the one that you received this morning, given their password and also a quick reference guide. After a user is added to the system, you'll need to assign the contracts that that user can view on the system. You do this by typing the user's email address and then selecting their relationship to the contract. You'll get an acknowledgement that the user has been assigned, as well as you'll see their information on the list. Now, when you assign a user as a subcontractor will have access to the system to view information on the particular contract that you granted rights to, as well as to create online forms to be submitted to the prime for the contract. And I'll show that to you when we get back to the online forms. One thing that I forgot to mention is when you add a user, the company has to have a valid City of Chicago supplier code. If that company does not have a valid City of Chicago supplier code, then you would go to Add Supplier and request a supplier code. You can do that by completing the fields on this form. All fields with a red asterisk are required. After you complete the form, you click Submit, and the CDA Finance Department will request a supplier code and send an email back to you when that code has been created in the system. Contact Us can be used to contact us with technical issues relating to the system. We'd ask you to provide as much detail as you can if there's a technical issue in the comments box. And after you do that, click Submit. If you have a non-technical question, you can view the CDA contacts list or click here and you'll be redirected to the CDA contacts list. Okay, I'm going to go back to the CDA online forms. Previously saved forms can be displayed by clicking on Previously Saved Forms. A list will show all forms created and saved and their status. So from this list, you'll be able to see what forms have been submitted to the CDA, approved by the deputy, and approved by finance. Forms are not approved, or status rate changes or any expenses are not approved until they're finally approved by finance. Once finance has given an approval on a form, an email will be sent out to the person who authorized the form or submitted the form to the CDA. So let me start by creating a new form. To create a new expenditure approval form, I click on the new expenditure approval form option. Pick the contract number that I'm creating this form for. If there is an associated release, I would pick the release number. If the contract is a task order contract, you'll be required to enter the task order number. And if there's a project associated with the contract, you can pick the project number by typing in the first few characters of the project number and picking from the list. Next, you would identify the authorized representative who will sign off on this form. This list will show a list of the prime subcontractor representatives that have been registered in the system. Those people will have the rights to sign off on the form. Next, you'll enter the line item detail for the expense item by clicking on Add New. You'll continue to do that until you've detailed each line item. If you need to edit an item that was previously entered, you click on the edit link. And if you need to delete an item that was entered, you click on the delete link. Also, by clicking on copy, you can copy a line item and then edit it. Any field marked by a red asterisk is required. Additionally, you'll sometimes see text in the field that indicates that it's required. So a justification is always required on this form. Attachments can be sent as well. So any document that you would have attached to the paper expenditure approval form, you will now attach to the electronic form. Please note that any one file cannot be larger than 50 megabytes. You can attach multiple forms, but any one file cannot be larger than 50 megabytes. I would also ask that you name the files in a way that is easy to understand what the attachment is. Okay, after creating the form, you have some options here. You can save it, you can submit it, or you can print it. By clicking on submit or print, the form will automatically save and then will be submitted or printed. So if I wanted to print this form, when I click on print, I'll get a printer-friendly version of the form, and I can print it. If I want to submit this form to the CDA, I would click on Submit. And again, only prime vendors can submit forms, so I want to show you a couple of things that will happen here. If I click on Submit, and I am not the authorized person who can submit this form, I'll get a message saying that I'm not the authorized user who can submit it to CDA. The reason I received that message is because the authorized representative was picked as Lisa Smith, and I'm actually Yvette Drake. So now that I have the correct authorized representative there, I can submit the form. When I click Submit, I'll need to acknowledge that I'm ready to submit the form to the CDA. As a prime vendor, I will be submitting the form to CDA when I click. As a subcontractor, when I click Submit, the form is actually submitted to the prime vendor, and the prime would then review that form and submit it to CDA. And you should get an acknowledgement that the form has been submitted with a form number. Okay, so that is the expenditure approval form. Each of the other forms behave very similar. So let me quickly walk you through a status rate and a travel authorization form. Again, I would pick the contract number. If this status rate is for a subcontractor, I would pick the subcontractor. And I indicated earlier that your subcontractor list will not populate here unless you have registered the subcontractor in the system. If this is for a particular release, I would pick the release. If it were a task order contract, I'd be required to enter the task order, and I can enter a project number if it's for a project. I need to pick my authorized representative, the person who's going to sign off on this form, and then add the line item detail. So to add information for a staff rate change, I would click on Add New. I need to indicate if this is a new staff or if I'm changing the rate. The staff's name, their classification, In this case, it's new, so there's no old rate. The new rate, if there's an overtime rate, you need to indicate that, and whether this staff will work from the home office or the project office, and a justification for adding this person. I'd continue to do that until I've added each staff. Now, one other thing that I want to point out is if you are changing a staff's rate, when you click change, if the contract has rates already set up in the system, you'll be able to pick the name of the person that you're changing the rate for. Currently, there are no staff rates set up in the electronic system, so you will be required to enter all your staff rates for each contract. Okay. So again, I would continue that process until I've added all the staff. If there are attachments, I would add an attachment. Now, I want to show you guys something here. When you attempt to submit or save, you may receive a validation error, which says, please attach resumes for all new hires. If there is at least one new hire being submitted on the form, the system expects to see at least one attachment. As you know, you are to submit resumes for all new staff. The other important thing to note is that it takes at least 7 to 10 business days for the approval process to take place. And so you want to make sure that you submit these forms as early as possible. Last is the requested date. The requested date for this staff rate change will be the current date. However, if this form is created on today but not submitted to CDA to some days in the future, the requested date will be the actual date that the form was submitted to CDA. Okay, now I'll quickly walk you through a travel authorization form. This form, like the others, all the forms really behave the same way. You pick the contract number, release, and put in the task order or project number if required. Pick the authorized representative, and then detail the travel information. So I would click Add New, indicate the name of the person who is traveling, the firm that this person is with, the travel dates, and the detail of the travel expenses. There's a field here to enter expenses for other. If you do enter other expenses, be sure to justify the other expenses in the meeting justification. So in the meeting travel information, I would also detail meeting information by clicking on Add New, giving a title for the meeting, the meeting date, and this probably won't match what I typed before. I think it was June 1st, so use that date. the meeting location, other participants, and the meeting justification. Oh, and I forgot to justify the $100 other expense, so I'm going to edit this. Okay, so I would continue to, if there were multiple meetings on this one request, I would continue to add the line item detail to give the meeting information. Once again, you're allowed to make attachments here. Any attachments that you would normally submit with the paper documents, you will attach with the electronic document. And then you can save and or submit the form. Now, if I go back to my list of previously submitted forms or saved forms, I can see the one form that I created this morning and submitted to the CDA. If for some reason I need to modify that form, as long as the CDA has not yet received the form or acknowledged receipt of the form, you can open and unsubmit the form by clicking to the bottom of the screen and click on Unsubmit. By doing that, you will be allowed to continue to edit the form, and after editing the form, you can submit it again. Okay, that's the conclusion of my demonstration of the vendor portal. I am now going to give you an opportunity to ask your questions. And again, if you have questions, please raise your hand, and you should see on your computer when I unmute your computer, you can ask your question. Okay, it looks like we have one hand raised, and that was Laura Henderson. And I'm unable to unmute you. Laura? Laura?
Yes.
Please ask your question.
From what I saw, this seems to be more for the service contractor, and we're not a service contractor. We're a supplies contractor. So is our version just to view the invoices, the releases, and when payments are due or
Yes.
have been submitted?
That's correct.
Okay.
So if you are not required to enter staff rate or expenditure or travel forms, then you don't need to use those features of the system.
Okay.
Okay, I don't have any other hands raised. If you think of any questions after this session, please feel free to send those questions to tiffany.ford@unisonpfaudit.com, and we will send a response and email to everyone. Thank you guys for attending the vendor portal demonstration, and we look forward to seeing you online.